My heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear my own footsteps echoing through the sterile hospital corridor. It was 10:47 p.m. on a Thursday night, and I had just driven 40 minutes from Manhattan in a state of absolute panic after receiving the call that every mother dreads. Owen was in the ICU. Critical condition. Hit-and-run accident. Come immediately. I had been closing an $8 million deal when my phone buzzed with the unknown number. The moment I heard Greenwich Medical Center and your son, nothing else mattered. I left my client sitting in the conference room, grabbed my coat, and ran. The entire drive was a blur of brake lights and prayers whispered through tears I refused to let fall until I could see him, touch him, know he was still alive. The third floor of Greenwich Medical Center smelled like antiseptic and something else I couldn't quite identify, fear, maybe, or despair. The fluorescent lights were too bright, making everything feel surreal and nightmarish. I was rushing toward the ICU entrance, my Louboutin heels clicking urgently against the linoleum, when a nurse I had never seen before appeared seemingly out of nowhere. She was younger than me, maybe mid-30s, with dark hair pulled back in a tight bun and eyes that held something I immediately recognized: genuine terror. Her hand shot out and grabbed my arm with surprising strength, fingers digging into the fabric of my Armani blazer. "Mrs. Vandermeer," she whispered urgently, her accent thick and Eastern European. "Hide quickly, trust me." I opened my mouth to ask what the hell she was talking about, but she was already pulling me backward, away from the ICU doors, toward a supply closet I hadn't even noticed. Every maternal instinct in me screamed to fight her, to run to my son, but something in her eyes stopped me. It was the look of someone trying to prevent a catastrophe, not cause one. "What are you?" I started, but she pressed her finger to her lips and pushed me into the small room filled with medical supplies, leaving the door open just a crack. "Do not make sound," she breathed, positioning herself so she could see through the narrow opening. "Just watch. You need to see." My entire body was trembling. This made no sense. Owen was in critical condition, possibly dying, and this stranger was hiding me in a closet? I should have pushed past her, should have demanded to see my son immediately, but something kept me frozen in place. Maybe it was the absolute conviction in her voice, or the way her hands were shaking almost as badly as mine. Through the crack in the door, I had a perfect view of Owen's room, number 347. The glass wall allowed me to see his bed, though I couldn't make out much detail from this distance. Just the shape of him under white hospital blankets, tubes and wires connecting him to machines I didn't understand. My baby boy, 29 years old but still my baby, lying there so still it made my chest physically ache. Then I saw him. Dr. Marcus Lennox, the renowned director of the ICU, the man my ex-husband Pierce had personally recommended as the best on the East Coast. He was walking down the corridor with that confident stride I had noticed during our brief meeting earlier, when I first arrived and was told Owen was being stabilized and I would need to wait. But something was different now. He wasn't walking with the purposeful swagger he had displayed earlier, surrounded by residents and radiating authority. This was furtive, cautious, his head turning to check both ends of the hallway like a thief ensuring the coast was clear. In his right hand, he carried a syringe. "What's he doing?" I whispered, barely audible even to myself. The nurse beside me tensed. "Watch." Dr. Lennox reached Owen's door and paused again, glancing over his shoulder. Satisfied he was alone, he entered the room. Through the glass, I watched him approach my son's bedside with movements that were calculated, deliberate, completely unlike the confident performance he had given earlier when explaining Owen's condition to me in careful, compassionate tones. He looked at the IV line running into Owen's arm. Then he looked at the syringe in his hand. My blood turned to ice. He was checking the monitors, noting the readings, and then his hand moved toward the IV port with clear intention. This wasn't a doctor administering treatment. This was something else entirely, something my brain refused to process even as I watched it happening. "Oh my God," I breathed, and the nurse's hand clamped over my mouth. Dr. Lennox inserted the syringe into the IV port. I watched the plunger depress slowly, whatever was in that syringe now flowing directly into my son's bloodstream. It took maybe 15 seconds total. Then he withdrew the syringe, slipped it into his pocket, adjusted the IV line to look undisturbed, and checked the monitors one more time. He nodded to himself, satisfied, and walked out of the room with that same furtive caution, checking the hallway before disappearing around the corner toward the staff elevators. The entire thing had taken less than 90 seconds. 90 seconds that shattered my entire understanding of reality. I pushed the nurse's hand away from my mouth and turned to face her. She was crying silently, tears streaming down her face, and I realized my own face was wet too. What did he just do? My voice cracked. What did he give my son? Something that is not in his chart, she said quietly, her accent making the words sound even more ominous. Something he has done before to other patients. Mrs. Vandermeer, I am Elena. I have been working this floor for 8 years, and for 6 months I have watched things that made me sick, but I had no proof, no one to tell who would believe me over famous doctor. I stared at her, trying to process what she was saying while my mind was still stuck on the image of that syringe, the methodical way Lennox had administered whatever poison he was pumping into Owen's veins. We need to go to security right now, I said, already moving toward the door, but Elena grabbed my arm again. No, if you go now, he will know you saw. He will say you are hysterical mother, that he gave approved medication, that I am lying immigrant nurse trying to cause trouble. He has done this before, Mrs. Vandermeer. Other people who asked questions, other people who saw things, they had accidents, they disappeared. There was a nurse, Emma, she was going to report him. 3 months ago, car accident, she died. Emma. The name hit me like a physical blow. Emma? Owen's girlfriend Emma? Elena's eyes widened. Owen Vandermeer was dating Emma Richardson? They had been together for almost a year, I said, my mind racing through connections I hadn't made before. Emma had died 6 weeks ago in what the police called a tragic accident. Single-car collision, no witnesses, vehicle fire destroyed most evidence. Owen had been devastated, withdrawn, different afterward. And then 3 weeks ago, he had quit his job at the investment firm with no explanation, just said he discovered something that changed everything. Oh God. Owen had been investigating. That's what the distance had been about. The canceled dinners, the distraction. He had been trying to protect me by keeping me out of it until he had proof. Your son, Elena said carefully. Was he asking questions about this hospital? About Dr. Lennox? I don't know, I admitted. He became very secretive about 2 months ago, stopped telling me things. I thought it was just stress from work, maybe grief about Emma. My voice was shaking badly now. The police said he was hit by a black SUV that ran a red light and fled the scene. No witnesses, no plates, nothing. Elena's expression told me everything. There are no coincidences here, Mrs. Vandermeer. Your son discovered something, just like Emma did. And now Dr. Lennox is making sure he never wakes up to tell anyone. The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen at prestigious hospitals in Greenwich, Connecticut. Doctors didn't murder patients. Ex-husbands who were respected surgeons didn't recommend killers to treat their own sons. But even as my mind rejected it, I knew Elena was telling the truth. I had seen it with my own eyes. The furtive movements, the unauthorized syringe, the calculated precision of someone who had done this before and knew exactly how to avoid detection. Why did Pierce recommend this hospital? I asked, more to myself than to Elena. He insisted Owen be transferred here immediately. He said he had connections, that this was the best place. Elena's face went very still. Dr. Pierce Vandermeer is your ex-husband. Something in her tone made my stomach drop. Yes. Do you know him? He comes here sometimes, she said slowly. He and Dr. Lennox, they are friends. They have dinner meetings. I have seen them laughing together in Dr. Lennox's office late at night when they think no one is watching. The room was spinning now. Pierce. My ex-husband, Owen's father, the man who had spent 3 years blaming me for choosing career over family, who had made me feel guilty every single day for building Vandermeer Financial Consulting while he saved lives as a surgeon. That Pierce. Could he possibly be involved in whatever Lennox was doing? I need proof, I said, forcing my voice to steady. I need evidence that will stand up, that can't be dismissed or explained away. Can you help me? Elena reached into her scrub pocket and pulled out a USB drive. I have been taking photos for 6 months. Medication logs that don't match what patients received. Photos of syringes I found in Dr. Lennox's private locker. Not labeled, not in any official inventory. Videos on my phone of him going into patient rooms at night when he is not scheduled. But I am nobody, Mrs. Vandermeer. I am immigrant nurse with no money, no connections. He is famous doctor. Who would believe me? I believe you, I said firmly. And I have money, I have connections, and I have something he doesn't expect. A mother who will burn this entire hospital to the ground before I let him kill my son. For the first time since this nightmare began, Elena smiled slightly. Then maybe we have chance, but we must be very careful. If he knows you suspect, he will move quickly. He has friends here, people who protect him. And your ex-husband, if he is involved, he will know you are a threat. How long do we have? I asked. How long before whatever he gave Owen takes effect? I do not know exactly what he gave, Elena admitted. But based on what I have seen before, he uses drugs that cause slow deterioration, things that look like natural complications from the original injury, maybe 24 hours, maybe 48. He will wait for decline, then suggest to you that life support should be removed because brain damage is too severe. Prognosis, hopeless. 48 hours. 2 days to expose a murderer, save my son, and possibly discover that my ex-husband was complicit in an attempted murder of our own child. I need to go home, I said suddenly. Owen was hiding something from me for weeks before the accident. If he was investigating, he would have kept evidence somewhere safe. Somewhere I could find it if something happened to him. You cannot let them know you suspect anything, Elena warned. Act normal. Grieve. Be confused and scared. That is what they expect. I've been acting in boardrooms for 20 years, I said coldly. Trust me. I know how to perform. We exchanged phone numbers, and Elena gave me the USB drive, which I slipped into my bra, the one place I knew would be safe. Then she opened the supply closet door carefully, checked that the coast was clear, and nodded for me to go. I walked to Owen's room on shaking legs that somehow held me upright. Through the glass, I could see him lying there, so still, so vulnerable. Machines beeped steadily, monitoring his life in numbers and graphs I didn't understand. I wanted to run in there, to throw my body over his, to protect him the way I should have protected him from whatever danger he had stumbled into. Instead, I pressed my hand against the glass and whispered, "Hold on, baby. Mommy's going to fix this." Then I turned and walked toward the elevator, past the nurse's station where Elena was now calmly documenting something in a chart, past the waiting area where other families sat in various stages of grief and hope, and out into the parking lot where my Mercedes sat under harsh fluorescent lights. I sat in the driver's seat for a full minute, hands gripping the steering wheel, breathing deeply to keep from screaming. Then I started the engine and drove toward the home I had shared with Owen before he moved out last year to his own apartment downtown. The house in Greenwich was dark and empty when I arrived at 11:43 p.m. I had given Owen a key when he moved out, told him he could come any time, use it as home base whenever he needed. Now I wondered if he had been here recently, if he had hidden evidence somewhere in the house where he knew I would eventually find it. I searched methodically, starting with his old bedroom that I had kept exactly as he left it. Nothing in the obvious places. No USB drives taped under drawers. No mysterious folders hidden in closets. I moved through the house room by room, checking everywhere I could think of, becoming increasingly desperate as minutes ticked by. It was almost 2 a.m. when I finally went down to the basement, a space Owen had always loved because it was where we stored all his childhood things. Boxes of trophies from lacrosse, old school projects, photos from better days when we were still a family. And there, behind a box labeled Owen High School Lacrosse, I found it, a manila envelope taped to the back of the box, with my name written across it in Owen's distinctive handwriting. Mom, if something happens to me. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely open the envelope. I sat down on the cold basement floor, surrounded by boxes of Owen's childhood memories, and pulled out the contents with a sense of dread that made me physically nauseous. The first thing I saw was a letter, handwritten on legal pad paper, dated 3 weeks ago, just days before his accident. Mom, it began, and I could hear his voice so clearly it hurt. If you're reading this, something has happened to me. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you what I was doing. I know these past few months have been confusing, and I know you've been worried about me pulling away. I wasn't pulling away from you. I was trying to protect you until I had enough evidence to go to the authorities safely. I pressed my hand against my mouth to stifle the sob that threatened to escape. He had been protecting me. My beautiful, stubborn boy had been protecting his mother. Emma's death wasn't an accident, the letter continued. She was a nurse at Greenwich Medical Center, and she discovered something terrible. Dr. Marcus Lennox has been conducting unauthorized medical experiments on ICU patients for at least 2 years, maybe longer. He's been administering experimental drugs without consent, falsifying medical records, and when patients die from complications, he lists natural causes related to their original conditions. My vision blurred with tears, but I forced myself to keep reading. Emma told me about it 6 weeks before she died. She was terrified, but felt she had a moral obligation to report it. She had started documenting everything, taking photos of medication discrepancies, recording suspicious activities. She was planning to go to the state medical board. 2 days before her scheduled meeting, she was killed in what police called a single-car accident on Route 15. I remembered that night. Owen had called me at midnight, barely coherent, saying Emma was dead. I had driven to his apartment immediately and held him while he cried, something he hadn't done since he was a child. I thought it was just grief. I never imagined it was also guilt, fear, and determination to find out the truth. I couldn't let it go, Mom. I couldn't let Emma die for nothing. So I started investigating on my own. I quit my job at the investment firm because I needed time to dig deeper, to follow the money. What I found is worse than Emma even knew. The letter went on to explain how Owen had used his financial analysis skills to trace unusual payment patterns. Dr. Lennox had been receiving substantial funds from a pharmaceutical company that was trying to fast-track approval for experimental medications. Rather than going through proper clinical trial protocols, Lennox had been using vulnerable ICU patients as test subjects, documenting results in private records that he then sold to the pharmaceutical company. But that wasn't even the worst part. Dad is involved, Owen wrote, and those 3 words hit me like a physical blow. I didn't want to believe it either. I spent weeks hoping I was wrong, looking for any other explanation. But the evidence is clear. Dad has been receiving monthly payments of $15,000 for consulting fees from a shell company that traces back to Lennox. His role is to identify potential candidates and refer them to Greenwich Medical Center, specifically to Lennox's ICU. I felt bile rise in my throat. Pierce, the man I had been married to for 26 years, the father of my child, had been selling patients to a murderer for $15,000 a month. How many people had died because of his greed? How many families had he destroyed? I've been gathering evidence for 2 months now, the letter continued. I have financial records, patient files that Emma managed to copy before she died, testimony from other nurses who witnessed suspicious activities but were too afraid to come forward. I have enough to bring them both down, Mom. I have a meeting scheduled with the state prosecutor's office next Monday. By the time you read this, either the meeting happened and they're both in custody, or something happened to prevent me from getting there. The letter was dated October 3rd. His accident had been October 6th, 3 days before his scheduled meeting with prosecutors. The timing was impossible to dismiss as coincidence. I'm leaving all the evidence in this envelope, Owen wrote. If something happens to me, if I don't make it to that meeting, please take this directly to Margaret Chen at the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Connecticut. She handled a corporate fraud case you consulted on a few years ago. You said she was brilliant and incorruptible. Don't go to local police. Lennox has connections throughout the state medical system, and I don't know how deep his network goes. Go federal. Margaret Chen. Yes, I remembered her. Sharp, relentless, someone who had turned down multiple offers from private firms because she believed in public service. If anyone would take this seriously and act quickly, it would be Margaret. I'm sorry for keeping this from you, Mom, the letter concluded. I know how much you hate being left out of important decisions, and I know you would have wanted to help. But Lennox is dangerous. Emma is dead because of what she knew. I couldn't risk losing you, too. You've always been my hero. The woman who built an empire from nothing, who never let anyone diminish her worth, who taught me that doing the right thing matters more than doing the easy thing. If I don't survive this, please finish what Emma and I started. Don't let these men keep destroying lives. I love you, always, Owen. I sat there on the basement floor, clutching my son's letter, and finally let myself cry. Not the contained, dignified tears I had been holding back all night, but deep, wrenching sobs that came from a place of pure maternal rage and anguish. My son was lying in an ICU bed, slowly being poisoned by the very man who was supposed to be saving him, because he had dared to seek justice for the woman he loved. And his father, his own father, was complicit. After several minutes, I forced myself to stop crying and examine the rest of the envelope's contents. There were several USB drives, each labeled with dates and categories: financial records, patient files, witness statements, audio recordings. There were printed bank statements showing transfers from a company called MedTech Solutions LLC to an account in Pierce's name, totaling over $420,000 over the past 2 years. There were copies of death certificates for patients who had died under Lennox's care, with Emma's handwritten notes in the margins, pointing out inconsistencies in the official cause of death versus what she had witnessed. 23 patients over 2 years. 23 people who had families, lives, futures, all sacrificed for Lennox's ambition and greed. One document particularly caught my attention: a printout of encrypted messages between Lennox and someone identified only as PV. The messages discussed complications and necessary risk management and ensuring loose ends are tied up. In one particularly chilling exchange from 6 weeks ago, PV had written, "The Richardson situation has been handled. Subject will not be attending any meetings." Lennox had responded, "Excellent. Maintain current protocols. PV Pierce Vandermeer." My ex-husband had just confirmed his involvement in Emma's murder in writing. I gathered everything carefully and put it back in the envelope, then sat there trying to think clearly despite the rage and fear clouding my judgment. Elena had said I had maybe 48 hours before Lennox would suggest removing Owen from life support. I needed to move fast, but I also needed to be smart about this. Going to the police was out, as Owen had warned. Lennox would have connections, people who owed him favors or were intimidated by his reputation. If I walked into a local precinct with this evidence, there was no guarantee it would reach the right people before Lennox found out and disappeared the evidence, or finished what he started with Owen. Margaret Chen was the answer. Federal prosecutors had resources and authority that local police didn't. They could move quickly, get warrants, freeze accounts, protect witnesses. But I needed to be strategic about how I approached her. I also needed to understand exactly what Lennox had given Owen tonight. If it was designed to cause gradual deterioration over the next 48 hours, maybe there was a way to counteract it, to flush it out of his system before it caused permanent damage. But I would need help from someone medical who wasn't compromised, someone who could be trusted. My mind went immediately to Dr. Sarah Whitmore, a physician I had known for years through charity work. She was a toxicologist at Yale New Haven Hospital, completely separate from Greenwich Medical Center's network. If anyone could analyze what might be in Owen's system and how to neutralize it, it would be Sarah. I looked at my watch. It was 2:47 a.m. In a few hours, I would need to return to the hospital to play the role of devastated mother waiting for news about her son's condition. I would need to face Pierce, who would undoubtedly show up playing the concerned father, completely unaware that I knew he had helped orchestrate our son's attempted murder. I would need to interact with Lennox, looking him in the eye while knowing he was slowly poisoning Owen, and pretend I suspected nothing. The thought of having to perform that level of deception made me feel sick, but I had been performing in various ways my entire career. Every negotiation where I smiled while men tried to undervalue my company, every board meeting where I stayed calm while being dismissed because of my gender, every social event where I pretended not to notice Pierce flirting with younger women, all of it had been practice for this moment. I could do this. I would do this. For Owen. For Emma. For all 23 victims whose deaths had been dismissed as unfortunate complications. I went upstairs and made coffee, knowing sleep was impossible. While it brewed, I called Sarah Whitmore's personal cell phone, the number she had given me years ago with instructions to use it any time for any reason. She answered on the 4th ring, voice thick with sleep. "Celeste? What's wrong?" "Sarah, I need your help," I said, keeping my voice steady through sheer force of will. "It's about Owen. He's in the ICU at Greenwich Medical Center, and I have reason to believe someone is trying to kill him." There was a pause. Then Sarah's voice came back sharp and alert. "Tell me everything." I gave her the abbreviated version. The hit and run, the suspicious doctor, what I had witnessed tonight, Owen's investigation. I didn't mention Pierce's involvement yet. That revelation could wait until I had Sarah's commitment to help. "Jesus Christ," Sarah breathed when I finished. "Celeste, this is beyond anything I've encountered. But yes, absolutely, I'll help. If you can get me a blood sample, I can analyze it for unusual compounds. But getting that sample without alerting anyone will be tricky." "I'll figure it out," I promised. "Can you be available later today?" "I'll clear my schedule," she said immediately. "And Celeste, be careful. If this Lennox really is what you say, he won't hesitate to eliminate anyone who threatens him." After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen island drinking coffee and watching the sun rise through the windows, thinking about how 24 hours ago my biggest concern had been finalizing the details of the Morgan acquisition. My world had been orderly, controlled, successful. Now I was planning how to steal blood samples from my comatose son, coordinate with federal prosecutors, and expose my ex-husband as an accessory to murder. By the time I showered and dressed for the day, choosing a simple black dress that conveyed appropriate maternal distress, I had a plan. It wasn't perfect, but it was all I had. At 7:30 a.m., I called Pierce's cell phone. He answered immediately, voice full of performative concern that now made my skin crawl. "Celeste, I was just about to call you. How's Owen? Have there been any changes overnight?" "No changes," I said, making my voice tremble slightly. "Pierce, I'm scared. I don't understand what the doctors are telling me. Could you come to the hospital? I need someone who speaks medical, who can help me understand what's really happening." "Of course," he said immediately. "I'll be there in 30 minutes. Celeste, Owen is in the best possible hands with Marcus Lennox. I promise you, if anyone can save him, it's Marcus." I closed my eyes against the wave of hatred that threatened to overwhelm me. "Thank you, Pierce. I'll see you soon." Then I gathered Owen's evidence envelope, placed it in a secure location only I could access, and drove back to Greenwich Medical Center to begin the most important performance of my life. Pierce was already in the ICU waiting room when I arrived at 8:15 a.m., looking every inch the concerned father in his perfectly pressed navy suit and somber tie. When he saw me, he stood immediately and opened his arms for a hug. I forced myself to accept it, to lean into his chest the way I might have done 3 years ago when we were still married, before I knew what he truly was. "How are you holding up?" he asked, and I had to admire the authenticity in his voice. If I didn't know better, I would have believed he was genuinely concerned. "I barely slept," I said, which was true. Every time I close my eyes, I see that moment when the hospital called. "Pierce, what if he doesn't wake up? What if I never get to talk to him again?" "Don't think like that," he said firmly, guiding me to sit down. "Owen is strong. He's a fighter, just like his mother. And Marcus Lennox is the best trauma intensivist in the state. If anyone can bring him through this, it's Marcus." The way he kept emphasizing Lennox's name, building him up as some kind of miracle worker, made me want to scream. Instead, I nodded tearfully and said, "Can we see him? I need to see him, Pierce. I need to be with my son." "Of course. Let me talk to the nurses and see if we can go in." I watched him walk to the nurses' station, watched how the nurses smiled at him with that deference medical professionals show to surgeons, how he charmed them effortlessly. He had always been good at this, making people like him, trust him, want to please him. It was one of the qualities that had attracted me to him 30 years ago, back when I was a junior financial analyst and he was a surgical resident with dreams of changing the world. Now I understood that charm was just another weapon in his arsenal. We were allowed into Owen's room together. Seeing my son in daylight somehow made everything worse. The tubes, the monitors, the rhythmic beeping that was the only reassurance his heart was still beating. His face was bruised and swollen, one eye completely closed, jaw slack in unconsciousness. This was my baby, the boy who had hugged me after my divorce and told me I was his hero, now lying broken because he had dared to seek justice. I took his hand carefully, avoiding the IV line, and whispered, "I'm here, sweetheart. Mom's here." Pierce stood on the other side of the bed, studying the monitors with professional assessment. Intracranial pressure is elevated but manageable, he said, more to himself than to me. Cardiac rhythm stable. Respiratory function adequate with ventilator support. These are actually decent numbers, Celeste. He's fighting. What about brain damage? I asked, playing the terrified mother who didn't understand medical terminology. The doctors keep talking about brain swelling and damage, but they won't tell me if he'll be okay when he wakes up. It's too early to know, Pierce said carefully. The next 72 hours are critical. We'll have a better picture once the swelling goes down and they can do more comprehensive neurological assessments. 72 hours. Longer than the 48 Elena had estimated. Was Pierce deliberately misleading me about the timeline? Or did he genuinely not know exactly when Lennox planned to suggest removing life support? A knock on the glass door made us both turn. Doctor. Marcus Lennox stood there in his pristine white coat, tablet in hand, looking exactly like what he was supposed to be, a dedicated physician checking on his patient. He smiled warmly when he saw Pierce and entered the room with easy confidence. Pierce, good to see you, he said, shaking my ex-husband's hand with obvious familiarity. Mrs. Vandermeer, I'm glad you're here. I wanted to give you both an update on Owen's condition. I forced myself to look at him, to meet his eyes without flinching, without showing any sign that I had watched him inject poison into my son's IV line just 9 hours ago. Please tell me anything. I need to understand what's happening to him. Lennox launched into an explanation that was clearly designed to sound thorough while actually saying very little. He used terms like traumatic brain injury, diffuse axonal injury, and guarded prognosis, while maintaining a tone of carefully calibrated concern. I watched Pierce nodding along, occasionally asking technical questions that Lennox answered with the ease of someone who had rehearsed this performance many times before. The next step, Lennox finally said, is to continue monitoring his intracranial pressure and neurological responses. We're keeping him in a medically induced coma to give his brain time to heal. In a few days, we'll begin the process of slowly reducing sedation and assessing his neurological function. And if the assessment shows significant brain damage? Pierce asked, and something in his tone made my chest tighten. Then we'll need to have a difficult conversation about quality of life and long-term prognosis, Lennox said gently, directing his attention to me. But we're not there yet, Mrs. Vandermeer. Let's take this one day at a time. One day at a time. Until the poison he administered last night did its work. Until Owen's condition deteriorated enough that suggesting removal of life support would seem like a compassionate medical recommendation rather than murder. Thank you, Dr. Lennox, I said softly. I trust you're doing everything possible for my son. I promise you, he's receiving the highest level of care, Lennox assured me, and the ease with which he lied was genuinely chilling. After Lennox left, Pierce suggested we get coffee in the cafeteria. I agreed, knowing this was an opportunity to gather more information, to understand exactly how deep his involvement went. We sat at a corner table with terrible hospital coffee, and Pierce reached across to take my hand. I know this is incredibly difficult, he said. I know things have been strained between us since the divorce, but Owen is our son. We need to be united for him right now. You're right, I said, squeezing his hand, even though touching him made my skin crawl. Pierce, can I ask you something? How do you know Dr. Lennox so well? You seemed very confident recommending him. Marcus and I have been friends for years, Pierce said easily. We've collaborated on several cases, consulted on complex trauma situations. He's brilliant, Celeste. Absolutely brilliant. Some of the work he's doing in critical care medicine is groundbreaking. Groundbreaking how? I asked, keeping my tone merely curious. Pierce hesitated, and I saw him calculating how much to say. He's involved in some cutting-edge research on neurological recovery and pharmaceutical interventions, things that haven't made it through the full FDA approval process yet, but show enormous promise. The bureaucracy of medical research can be frustratingly slow sometimes. There it was. Not quite an admission, but close enough. Pierce knew about the unauthorized experiments. He knew Lennox was bypassing proper protocols, and he was defending it as necessary innovation rather than criminal negligence. That sounds complicated, I said carefully. Is that legal? It's a gray area, Pierce admitted. But sometimes advancing medicine requires taking calculated risks. The patients Marcus works with are already in critical condition. If traditional treatments aren't working, Why not try something that might save them? Because informed consent matters, I wanted to scream. Because human beings aren't lab rats. Because Emma Richardson and 23 other people are dead because of your calculated risks. Instead, I nodded slowly. I suppose that makes sense, as long as the families know and agree. Of course, Pierce said, but something flickered in his eyes. The families always know. He was lying. The families didn't know. The consent forms were forged, and Pierce knew it, was complicit in it, was profiting from it. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Elena. Need to talk. Private. Staff parking lot, white Honda, 11 a.m. I glanced at my watch. It was 9:30. Pierce, I need to go home for a few hours, I said. I didn't bring any of my things last night, and I want to get clothes, my laptop, some work materials. I'll go crazy just sitting here staring at Owen. Do you want me to come with you? He offered. No, stay here, please, I said quickly. If anything changes, if the doctors need to make any decisions, I want someone here who understands the medical side. Can you do that for me? Of course, he said, looking pleased to be needed. I'll call you immediately if anything changes. I kissed his cheek, another performance that took all my willpower, and left the hospital. But instead of driving home, I circled around to the staff parking lot and found the white Honda that Elena had described. She was sitting in the driver's seat, still in her scrubs from the night shift, looking exhausted and frightened. I got into the passenger seat and she immediately handed me her phone. Look at this. I went back through surveillance footage from the nurse's station computer before I left this morning. Watch what happens at 2:47 a.m. The footage was grainy, but clear enough. It showed the hallway outside Owen's room. At 2:47, a man in dark clothes and a baseball cap entered Owen's room through the side entrance that connected to the service corridor. He was in there for approximately 4 minutes, then left the same way he came. His face was obscured, but his build and movements were distinctively masculine. Who is that? I asked. I do not know, Elena said. But look at this. She fast-forwarded to 3:15 a.m. The same figure entered another patient's room 2 doors down from Owen. Same duration, same furtive movements. And this, another timestamp, 4:03 a.m., a third room. He's checking on the patients who received Lennox's injections, I said slowly. Making sure the drugs are having the intended effect. There is more, Elena said grimly. She pulled out a small notebook filled with dates and times. I have been documenting everything for 6 months. Every time Dr. Lennox administers unauthorized medication, within 6 hours, this man appears. He checks monitors, sometimes adjusts IV drips, then disappears. I think he is the one who ensures no one survives to tell what happened. The clinical efficiency of it made me nauseous. Lennox administered the poison, then sent someone to monitor and ensure the job was completed. It was systematic, organized, professional. Have you ever seen his face? I asked. No. He is always very careful. But I have noticed something. He has keys to service corridors that only senior hospital staff should have access to. This is not random person walking in from outside. So Lennox had an accomplice who worked at the hospital, someone with legitimate access and the medical knowledge to adjust treatments without raising suspicion. The conspiracy was bigger than just one corrupt doctor. Elena, I need you to do something dangerous, I said. I need you to get a blood sample from Owen. A fresh draw, documented with today's date and time, that I can take to a toxicologist for independent analysis. Can you do that without anyone knowing? She thought for a moment. During shift change at 3 p.m., there is always confusion. Many nurses doing handoffs, doctors doing rounds, families visiting. I can say I am drawing blood for routine labs that Dr. Lennox ordered. No one will question. How will you get it to me? There is coffee shop across street from hospital, Greenfield Cafe. I will leave it in the women's bathroom, taped under the sink in the last stall at 3:30 p.m. You retrieve it. It was risky, convoluted, and absolutely necessary. Thank you, Elena. I know you're risking everything by helping me. Your son risks everything to expose the truth, she said simply. Emma risks everything. I cannot be coward now, but Mrs. Vandermeer, you must be very careful. I think they are watching you. What do you mean? This morning, when you arrived with your ex-husband, I saw Dr. Lennox make phone call. After he hung up, he was talking to head of security, pointing at surveillance monitors. I think they are making sure you do not discover anything. So they were suspicious. Not enough to act yet, but enough to watch. I would need to be even more careful than I thought. I returned home and spent the next 2 hours going through Owen's evidence more thoroughly, understanding the full scope of what he had discovered. The financial trail was damning. Over $2 million flowing from MedTech Solutions LLC through various shell companies to both Lennox and Pierce over the past 3 years. The patient files showed a clear pattern of selecting victims who were already critically ill, vulnerable, unlikely to have families who would ask too many questions. Emma's documentation was particularly heartbreaking. She had included personal notes about the patients she had cared for, people she had known as human beings rather than research subjects. Mr. Chen, 73, grandfather of 5, loved playing chess. Died 3 days after unauthorized injection of compound RT-47. Official cause: complications from pneumonia. Reality: cardiac arrest induced by experimental drug. The entries went on. 23 lives reduced to clinical observations and cover stories. At 3:15 p.m., I went to Greenfield Cafe and ordered a latte I had no intention of drinking. The women's bathroom was empty. In the last stall, taped under the sink exactly as Elena had promised, was a small medical specimen bag containing a vial of blood labeled O. Vandermeer, 11-23-24, 15 sois. I retrieved it quickly and called Sarah Whitmore. I have the sample, I said. Can you see me today? Come to my lab at Yale New Haven, she said. Use the research entrance on Cedar Street. I'll meet you there at 5 p.m. Celeste, I've been thinking about what you told me. If this Lennox really is administering unauthorized experimental drugs, we're looking at a long list of potential compounds. The analysis might take several days. We don't have several days, I said. We have maybe 36 hours before he suggests terminating life support. Can you at least identify the most dangerous compounds? The ones that might be causing acute deterioration? I'll prioritize those, she promised. But Celeste, even if I identify what's in his system, reversing the effects might not be possible depending on what damage has already been done. Just tell me what we're dealing with, I said. Please, Sarah. I drove to New Haven and met Sarah at her laboratory, a sterile space filled with equipment I didn't understand, but that looked appropriately high-tech and expensive. She took the blood sample and immediately began running tests while I waited, drinking coffee and trying not to think about Owen lying in that hospital bed with poison working through his system. 2 hours later, Sarah came out of the analysis room looking grim. Celeste, I found 3 distinct compounds in Owen's blood that shouldn't be there. One is an experimental anticoagulant that's still in phase 2 trials. The second is a synthetic derivative of a neurotoxin that's been banned in human testing since 2019. The third is something I've never seen before. It's not in any pharmaceutical database I have access to. What do they do? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. In combination, they create a cascade effect. The anticoagulant increases bleeding risk, which is dangerous in someone with traumatic brain injury. The neurotoxin causes progressive degradation of neural tissue, essentially accelerating brain damage. The third compound seems to mask the effects of the other two, making it appear as though deterioration is due to the original injury rather than pharmaceutical intervention. Can it be reversed? The anticoagulant, yes, with standard reversal agents. The neurotoxin is trickier. There's an antidote that was developed for it, but it's experimental itself and not widely available. The third compound, I don't know. I'll need more time to analyze its molecular structure and determine how to neutralize it. How much time does Owen have before the damage becomes permanent? Sarah hesitated. Based on the concentration levels I'm seeing and the progression pattern of the neurotoxin, I'd say 48 hours maximum before neurological damage becomes irreversible, probably less. 48 hours. Elena had been right, and we were already 9 of those hours in. Sarah, can you document everything you found? I need evidence that will hold up in court, that proves these substances were administered deliberately and aren't naturally occurring or standard medical treatment. I'll prepare a full report with all my findings, including molecular analysis and chain of custody documentation for the blood sample, she said. But Celeste, this is just the first step. You need to get Owen away from that hospital and that doctor immediately. If Lennox realizes you're onto him, he'll accelerate his timeline. She was right, but moving Owen would require medical authorization from his attending physician, Dr. Marcus Lennox himself. I couldn't just show up with an ambulance and demand his transfer without triggering every alarm bell in Lennox's head, unless I had legal authority that superseded Lennox's medical authority. I called Margaret Chen's office on my drive back to Greenwich. Her assistant said she was in court, but would call back as soon as possible. I left a message saying it was urgent, life or death, and involved federal crimes including murder and medical fraud. Margaret called back 20 minutes later. Celeste Vandermeer, it's been what, 4 years? Your message said life or death. Margaret, I need to see you tonight. I have evidence of a conspiracy involving at least 2 doctors, multiple deaths, pharmaceutical fraud, and attempted murder of my son. I need federal warrants, protection for witnesses, and medical authorization to transfer my son out of a compromised hospital immediately. There was a pause. That's quite a list. How solid is your evidence? Financial records showing $2 million in illegal payments, documentation of 23 suspicious deaths, eyewitness testimony from medical staff, and toxicology reports proving my son is being deliberately poisoned as we speak. I have everything, Margaret. I just need someone with authority to act on it before they kill him. Come to my office at 8 p.m., she said immediately. Bring everything. I'll have my team standing by. When I returned to the hospital at 6 p.m., Pierce was still there, sitting beside Owen's bed, reading a medical journal. He looked up when I entered and smiled. Hey, any changes while I was gone? No changes, he said. I talked to Marcus earlier. He's planning to run another set of neurological tests tomorrow morning to assess brain activity. Depending on what those show, we'll have a better sense of his prognosis. Tomorrow morning. Less than 24 hours. The timeline was accelerating. Pierce, I want a second opinion, I said suddenly. I want another neurologist to evaluate Owen, someone not affiliated with this hospital. Pierce's expression shifted slightly, becoming cautious. Why? Don't you trust Marcus? It's not about trust, I said carefully. It's about making sure we're doing everything possible. I've been reading about traumatic brain injuries online, and some articles suggest that different specialists interpret neurological data differently. I just want to be absolutely certain we're not missing anything. Celeste, I understand you're scared, but bringing in another doctor at this stage could complicate Owen's treatment plan. Marcus knows his case intimately. A new doctor would need time to review everything, and time is something we don't have a lot of. The way he was pushing back, trying to keep Owen under Lennox's exclusive care, confirmed everything. Pierce knew what was happening. He was actively enabling it. I'm his mother, I said firmly. I have medical power of attorney. If I want a second opinion, I'm entitled to one. Pierce held up his hands in surrender. Of course you are. I'm just trying to help you understand the medical realities. But if you want another opinion, I'll support that. Do you have someone in mind? I'll make some calls, I said vaguely. Maybe someone from Yale or Boston. We sat in uncomfortable silence for several minutes before Pierce's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and stood. I need to take this. I'll be right back. He stepped into the hallway, and I watched through the glass as he answered. His body language changed immediately. Shoulders tense, free hand gesturing in agitation. The conversation lasted about 3 minutes before he ended the call and came back into the room, looking noticeably disturbed. Everything okay? I asked innocently. Fine, he said, but his tone said otherwise. Just a colleague with a complicated case. Listen, I need to head home for a few hours, take care of some things. Will you be okay here alone? I'll be fine, I assured him. Go. I know you have your own life. After Pierce left, I sat beside Owen's bed and took his hand. I'm getting you out of here, baby, I whispered. Just hold on a little longer. Help is coming. At 7:30 p.m., Elena appeared at the door. She looked terrified. Mrs. Vandermeer, you need to leave now. I just heard Dr. Lennox talking to someone on the phone. He said, the mother is becoming a problem. We need to accelerate the timeline. My blood ran cold. When? Tonight. He is planning to adjust Owen's medications tonight, cause rapid deterioration, then declare brain death in the morning. He already has papers prepared for you to sign authorizing organ donation. They were moving up their schedule because they sensed I was suspicious, which meant I had hours, not days. I grabbed my bag and headed for the elevator. Elena, thank you. Stay away from Owen's room tonight. Don't do anything that might make them suspicious of you. Where are you going? To get help from people they can't intimidate or kill, I said. Federal prosecutors. I drove to Margaret Chen's office in New Haven, breaking every speed limit, knowing that Owen's life depended on whether federal law enforcement could move faster than murderers. Margaret Chen's office in the federal building was exactly as I remembered. Walls lined with law books, a desk covered in case files, and the sharp, focused energy of someone who had dedicated her life to prosecuting criminals who thought they were untouchable. She stood when I entered, extending her hand with a firm grip that felt like the first solid thing I'd held onto in 48 hours. Celeste, you look like hell, she said bluntly. Sit down and show me what you have. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I opened my bag and began laying out everything on her desk. Owen's letter, the USB drives containing financial records and patient files, Emma's handwritten documentation of suspicious deaths, printouts of the encrypted messages between Lennox and Pierce, Sarah Whitmore's toxicology report showing the 3 compounds that shouldn't exist in Owen's bloodstream. Margaret picked up each piece of evidence methodically, her expression growing darker with every page she read. 2 other prosecutors had joined us, a woman named Rachel Torres and a man named David Kim, and they were examining the financial records with the intensity of people who understood exactly what they were looking at. This is a federal RICO case, Rachel said quietly. Conspiracy, wire fraud, Medicare fraud, if any of these patients were on government insurance, which statistically they had to be. We're looking at decades in prison for everyone involved. We're looking at murder, I corrected. 23 people are dead, and my son is being poisoned right now as we speak. I don't care about prison sentences. I care about stopping them before they kill Owen tonight. Margaret looked up sharply. Tonight? You said you had 48 hours. They moved up the timeline, I said, hearing the desperation in my own voice. One of the nurses overheard Lennox saying they need to accelerate. He's planning to induce rapid deterioration tonight and declare brain death in the morning. I have maybe 4 hours before he makes his move, and I need you to stop him. Margaret exchanged glances with Rachel and David. Some silent communication passed between them, and then Margaret picked up her phone. Get me Judge Hartwell, she said to whoever answered. I don't care if he's at dinner. This is urgent. Life or death, urgent. While we waited for the call to connect, David was already drafting warrant applications on his laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard. We'll need warrants for the hospital, Lennox's office, his home, Pierce Vandermeer's residence, and financial records, the pharmaceutical company, everything. We'll need federal marshals to execute them simultaneously so no one has time to destroy evidence. And we need medical authorization to transfer Owen Vandermeer to federal protection, Rachel added, a court order superseding Lennox's medical authority. Can you get all that in 4 hours? I asked. We can get it in 2 if Judge Hartwell cooperates, Margaret said. The evidence you've brought is overwhelming, Celeste. This is the kind of case we dream about. Clear documentation, financial trail, eyewitness testimony, physical evidence. The only question is whether we can move fast enough. Judge Hartwell was apparently at a restaurant celebrating his anniversary, but Margaret's urgency convinced him to leave immediately and meet us at the courthouse. By 9:15 p.m., we were standing in his chambers while he reviewed the warrant applications and evidence with reading glasses perched on his nose. This is extraordinary, he said finally, and absolutely horrifying. Dr. Lennox is a respected member of the medical community. These allegations could destroy careers even if they prove to be false. They're not false, Your Honor, I said, unable to stay silent. My son is dying because he tried to expose this. Emma Richardson died because she tried to stop it. 23 other people died as guinea pigs for illegal experiments. Please, don't let them kill one more person. Judge Hartwell looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something shift in his expression. Recognition that this wasn't abstract legal theory, but a mother fighting to save her child. He picked up his pen and began signing. I'm authorizing all warrants, he said. Federal marshals are to execute them simultaneously at 11 p.m. tonight. I'm also issuing an emergency medical order removing Owen Vandermeer from Dr. Chai Lennox's care and authorizing immediate transfer to Yale New Haven Hospital under protective custody. Mrs. Vandermeer, You'll need to be present at Greenwich Medical Center with the marshals when they serve the transfer order. I'll be there, I said, relief flooding through me so intensely I felt lightheaded. Margaret's team moved with military precision. By 10:30 p.m., I was sitting in an unmarked federal vehicle with 6 U.S. Marshals watching Greenwich Medical Center from across the street while teams positioned themselves at Lennox's home, Pierce's condominium, the hospital's administrative offices, and the pharmaceutical company's headquarters. Marshal Jennifer Wade, the team leader, had briefed me on the plan. At exactly 11 p.m., teams would execute warrants simultaneously. My team would enter the ICU, serve the court order transferring Owen to federal protection, and secure him for immediate transport. Medical staff from Yale New Haven were standing by with an ambulance equipped with everything necessary to safely move a critical care patient. Mrs. Vandermeer, I need you to understand something, Marshal Wade said. When we go in, it's going to be chaotic. Hospital staff will be confused, possibly angry. Dr. Lennox will almost certainly be there, and he'll resist. We need you to stay calm and stay with us. Don't engage with him. Don't respond to anything he says. Just stay close and let us handle it. What about Pierce? I asked. My ex-husband. He's involved in this. Will you be arresting him tonight? A team is executing a warrant at his residence right now, she confirmed. By the time we enter this hospital, he'll already be in custody. The thought of Pierce being arrested gave me a savage satisfaction that probably wasn't healthy, but felt absolutely justified. The man who had blamed me for choosing career over family had sold our son to a murderer for $15,000 a month. Whatever happened to him from this point forward, he had earned. At 10:58 p.m., Marshal Wade's radio crackled. All teams in position. Green light on your mark. 2 minutes, Wade said into her radio. Then to me, stay behind me at all times. Ready? I nodded, not trusting my voice. At exactly 11 p.m., 6 federal marshals in tactical gear walked through the main entrance of Greenwich Medical Center with me following behind. The night security guard stood, confused, as Wade showed her badge and court orders. Federal warrant. We need access to the ICU immediately. We took the elevator to the 3rd floor. As the doors opened, I could see the nurses' station where Elena worked, could see the hallway leading to Owen's room. Everything looked normal, peaceful, like any other night in a hospital where people were fighting to survive. That was about to change dramatically. Wade led us directly to Owen's room. Through the glass, I could see him exactly as I'd left him hours ago. Still, broken, vulnerable. And standing beside his bed, syringe in hand, was Dr. Marcus Lennox. We had arrived just in time. Wade burst through the door, badge held high. U.S. Marshals, Dr. Lennox, step away from the patient immediately. Lennox's head snapped up, and the expression on his face was something I would remember forever. Shock, fear, and then calculating assessment as he realized his world was ending. The syringe was still in his hand, still uncapped, whatever poison it contained, ready to be injected into my son's IV line. What is the meaning of this? He demanded, trying to summon authority he no longer possessed. This is a medical facility. You have no right to interfere with patient care. We have every right, Wade said, advancing on him. We have a federal warrant for your arrest and a court order transferring Owen Vandermeer to federal medical protection. Put down the syringe and step away from the patient now. For one terrifying moment, I thought Lennox might try to inject Owen anyway, might decide that if he was going down, he would take his victim with him. His hand tightened on the syringe, his eyes flicking between Wade and Owen's IV line. Don't, I said quietly. It's over, Dr. Lennox. We have everything. The financial records, the patient files, the toxicology reports proving what you've been doing. Emma documented it all before you killed her. Owen documented it all before you tried to kill him. You can't get away with this anymore. Something in my voice must have convinced him that resistance was futile. He set the syringe down on the medical tray and raised his hands. 2 marshals immediately moved in, handcuffing him while reading his rights. You have no idea what you've done, Lennox said to me as they led him toward the door. The work I was doing, the advances in medical science, you've just set back critical research by decades. Your self-righteous crusade will cost countless lives that could have been saved. The only lives you saved were your own career and bank account, I said coldly. Emma Richardson's life, 23 patients who trusted you. And you almost took my son. You're not a researcher, Dr. Lennox. You're a murderer in a white coat. He was still protesting his innocence, claiming we didn't understand the greater good, as the marshals removed him from the ICU in handcuffs. The Yale New Haven medical team entered immediately, led by Dr. Sarah Whitmore herself. She began assessing Owen's condition, checking his vitals, reviewing the medication chart with an expression that grew increasingly angry. He's been overdosed on sedatives within the past 2 hours, she said. Deliberately, far beyond therapeutic levels. Another 30 minutes and he would have been in respiratory arrest. Celeste, we got here just in time. The ambulance transport took 15 minutes to prepare. I rode with Owen, holding his hand while Sarah administered the reversal agents for the anticoagulant and began the experimental antidote for the neurotoxin. As we pulled away from Greenwich Medical Center, I looked back to see police cars and federal vehicles surrounding the building, agents entering with boxes to collect evidence. It was 11:47 p.m., 48 hours after receiving the phone call that started this nightmare. My son was finally safe. The intensive care unit at Yale New Haven Hospital was brighter, cleaner, and felt infinitely safer than the place where Owen had been slowly dying. Sarah had assembled a team of specialists, neurologists, toxicologists, critical care physicians who had no connection to Lennox or his network of corruption. They worked through the night administering antidotes, monitoring Owen's brain function, and carefully reversing the chemical cascade that Lennox had set in motion. I sat in the observation room watching through the glass, unable to leave, unable to sleep, barely able to breathe as I waited to see if we had acted quickly enough. Sarah came out at 3 a.m. with an update, looking exhausted but cautiously optimistic. The anticoagulant has been successfully reversed, she said. The neurotoxin antidote is working, though we won't know the extent of any permanent damage until we can bring him out of sedation and assess his neurological function. The third compound is breaking down naturally now that we've stopped the continuous administration Lennox was providing. Celeste, I think he's going to make it. I started crying then, the kind of deep, shaking sobs that come from releasing 48 hours of terror that I had been forcing myself to contain. Sarah sat beside me and put her arm around my shoulders, letting me fall apart in the way I hadn't allowed myself to do in front of marshals, prosecutors, or anyone else who needed to see me strong and in control. He's going to make it, she repeated softly. Your son is going to survive this. Margaret Chen arrived at 4 a.m. with news about the raids. She looked energized, despite the late hour, the way prosecutors do when they've just taken down a major criminal operation. We've arrested 17 people so far, she said, pulling up a chair. Lennox, obviously, Pierce, 4 other doctors at Greenwich Medical Center who were involved to varying degrees, 3 nurses who were helping falsify records, 5 executives from MedTech Solutions LLC, the pharmaceutical company funding the illegal experiments, and 2 hospital administrators who were taking kickbacks to look the other way. What about Pierce? I asked, hating that I cared, but needing to know. What did he say when they arrested him? He tried to cooperate immediately, Margaret said with obvious disdain. Started offering to testify against Lennox within 5 minutes of being read his rights. Said he was just a consultant, didn't know the full extent of what was happening, was misled about the legality of the protocols. Standard stuff from someone trying to minimize their own culpability. He knew, I said flatly. He knew everything. Owen's evidence proves he was receiving detailed reports about patient outcomes. He knew people were dying, and he kept referring more victims. Oh, we know he knew, Margaret assured me. The encrypted messages your son recovered are damning. We have Pierce directly discussing acceptable loss rates and eliminating complications. He's going down for conspiracy to commit murder, wire fraud, and about 15 other charges. He's looking at 25 to 30 years minimum. 30 years. Pierce would be almost 90 when he got out. His medical career destroyed, his reputation in ruins, his freedom gone. The man who had accused me of choosing career over family had sold his own son for money and would spend the rest of his life in prison because of it. What about Emma Richardson's death? I asked. Can you prove that was murder and not an accident? We're reopening the investigation based on what we found tonight, Margaret said. Lennox's personal computer had encrypted files with detailed plans for staging various types of accidents. We found correspondence with someone we believe is a professional fixer, discussing payment for problem resolution. The Connecticut State Police are working with us now to review the physical evidence from Emma's crash with fresh eyes. And the mystery man Elena saw on the surveillance footage? The one checking on patients after Lennox administered the drugs? Daniel Foster, an ICU nurse who worked night shifts, Margaret said. We arrested him at his apartment an hour ago, found $50,000 in cash hidden in his closet, and detailed logs of patients he had monitored for Lennox. He's already asking for a plea deal. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. This wasn't just one corrupt doctor. It was an entire network of people who had valued money and scientific ambition over human life. How many families had sat where I was sitting, grieving loved ones they believed died from natural complications, never knowing they had been murdered as part of an illegal experiment? Margaret, what about the families of the other victims, the 23 people Emma documented? We're contacting them all this week, she said gently. They deserve to know the truth, even though it's going to devastate them all over again. We're also reviewing every death in Lennox's ICU over the past 5 years to identify any other potential victims. The number could be much higher than 23. That realization made me feel sick. Elena arrived at 6 a.m., still in her scrubs, looking terrified and relieved in equal measure. When she saw me, she burst into tears, and I hugged her tightly, this brave woman who had risked everything to save my son. Thank you, I whispered. Thank you for being courageous when it mattered most. You saved Owen's life. How is he? She asked, pulling back to look at me. He's going to survive, I said, and saying it out loud made it feel real for the first time. The doctors think he'll make a full recovery. Elena, you're a hero. You know that, right? She shook her head. I am just nurse who finally did what I should have done months ago. If I had been braver earlier, maybe Emma would still be alive. Maybe your son would not be in hospital bed. You were one person facing a powerful man with connections and resources, I said firmly. You documented everything you could and waited for the moment when you could make a difference. That took incredible courage. Don't diminish what you did. Margaret had been listening to our conversation and stepped forward. Ms. Kowalski, I'm Margaret Chen with the U.S. Attorney's Office. We're going to need your full testimony about everything you witnessed. I want you to know that you'll have complete federal protection as a key witness. We're also fast-tracking your permanent residency status and providing legal counsel to ensure you're fully protected. Elena looked overwhelmed. I do not need special treatment. I just want to stop bad men from hurting people. Ah, you're getting special treatment anyway, Margaret said with a smile. We protect people who do the right thing, and you definitely did that. At 8 a.m., Sarah Whitmore made the decision to begin reducing Owen's sedation. It would be a gradual process over the next 24 hours, slowly bringing him back to consciousness while monitoring for any signs of neurological damage. I was allowed to sit beside his bed, holding his hand, talking to him about anything and everything, memories from his childhood, updates about the case, promises about all the things we would do together once he recovered. I'm so proud of you, I told him, even though I knew he couldn't hear me yet. What you did, investigating Lennox and Pierce, gathering all that evidence, trying to get justice for Emma, that took extraordinary courage, Owen. You're exactly the man I always hoped you would grow up to be. Brave, principled, willing to stand up for what's right even when it's dangerous. Just like your mom, people might say, but honestly, I think you're braver than I ever was. By afternoon, Margaret returned with Pierce's lawyer, who had apparently convinced him that cooperation was his only hope for any kind of reduced sentence. Pierce had agreed to provide detailed testimony about every aspect of the conspiracy in exchange for 20 years instead of 30. Margaret wanted to know if I wanted to be present when they took his formal statement. No, I said immediately. I don't want to see him or hear his excuses. Just make sure he pays for what he did. He will, Margaret promised. But Celeste, there's something you should know. Pierce is claiming he tried to protect Owen. Says he specifically told Lennox that Owen was off limits, that his son was never to be touched. According to Pierce, Lennox went rogue when he realized Owen was the one investigating him. I laughed bitterly. He's lying. Owen's evidence shows Pierce knew about the hit and run. He approved it. He's just trying to salvage whatever shred of humanity he thinks he has left by pretending he drew the line at his own son. That's what we think too, Margaret said. The evidence contradicts his claims, but I wanted you to hear it from me first, in case he tries to contact you later with the same story. The thought of Pierce reaching out to me, trying to justify his actions or seek forgiveness, made my skin crawl. I never want to speak to him again. Is there a way to ensure he can't contact me or Owen? We can arrange that, Margaret said. Restraining order, no contact provisions as part of his plea agreement, whatever you need. That evening, I finally allowed myself to go to the hospital cafeteria and eat something substantial for the first time in 2 days. Elena joined me, and we sat together in exhausted silence, two women who had been strangers 72 hours ago and were now bound together by shared trauma and victory. What will you do now? I asked her. After all this is over? I do not know, she admitted. I cannot go back to Greenwich Medical Center. Too many memories, too much sadness. Maybe I will work here at Yale New Haven, or maybe somewhere completely different. Elena, I'm starting a foundation, I said, the idea crystallizing as I spoke. Something dedicated to medical ethics oversight and protecting vulnerable patients. I'm going to call it the Owen and Emma Foundation. I want you to be part of it. Director of Nursing Ethics, or whatever title you want. You understand this issue from the inside in a way I never could. She looked stunned. Mrs. Vandermeer, I am just ICU nurse. I am not qualified for such position. You're exactly qualified, I corrected. You saw corruption and risked everything to stop it. You understand what nurses face when they witness wrongdoing, the fear of retaliation, the uncertainty about who to trust. That's the expertise we need. Please, think about it. She nodded slowly, tears forming in her eyes again. I will think. Thank you, Mrs. Vandermeer, for everything. Call me Celeste, I said. I think we're past formalities at this point. At 11 p.m. that night, exactly 72 hours after the nightmare began, Owen's eyes opened. It was gradual, flickering at first, his body fighting against the sedation as the doctors carefully reduced it. Sarah was monitoring his brain activity, watching the monitors that tracked everything from intracranial pressure to neurological responses. I was holding his hand, whispering encouragement, when his fingers suddenly squeezed mine. Owen, I breathed. Baby, can you hear me? His eyes opened fully and found mine. Confusion, disorientation, then recognition. His mouth moved, trying to form words around the breathing tube that was still helping his lungs. Don't try to talk yet, Sarah said quickly, moving to his other side. Owen, you're in the hospital. You're safe. You had an accident, but you're going to be okay. I'm Dr. Whitmore, and I'm taking care of you. Your mom is right here. His eyes moved to me again, questioning, and I saw the moment awareness flooded back. The investigation, the danger, the realization that something had gone terribly wrong. You did it, I told him, squeezing his hand. You exposed them. Lennox is in custody. Pierce is in custody. Everyone involved in the conspiracy is being arrested. Emma's death is being reinvestigated as murder. You got justice for her, Owen. You got justice for all of them. Tears started running down his face, and I realized this was the first time he had been able to grieve for Emma without the weight of unfinished business, without the burden of being the only one who knew the truth. She had died trying to stop monsters, and her death had not been in vain. Owen had made sure of that. Over the next hour, as the breathing tube was removed and Owen's ability to communicate returned, the full story emerged in fragmented pieces. He confirmed what I had learned from his letter and evidence, that Emma had confided in him about what she witnessed, that they had been gathering proof together until her murder, that he had continued the investigation alone despite knowing he was in danger. I couldn't let them win, he said, his voice hoarse from the breathing tube. Dad was involved, and I just kept thinking, how could he do this? How could he be part of something so evil? I don't know, I said honestly. I don't understand how the man I married, the man who helped create you, became someone capable of this. But Owen, that's on him, not on us. We didn't fail. He did. I should have told you what I was doing, he said. I thought I was protecting you, but instead I almost got myself killed and left you alone to deal with everything. You were trying to be heroic, I said. You were trying to spare me from danger and worry. I understand that impulse, believe me. But from now on, we protect each other by trusting each other with the truth, okay? No more secrets, Even when we think they're for the other person's good. He nodded, gripping my hand tightly. Deal. Mom, did they really arrest Dad? They did. He's trying to cooperate now, trying to minimize his role, but the evidence you gathered proves he was deeply involved. He's going to prison for a very long time. Owen closed his eyes, processing that. I always knew he resented you for being more successful than him. I knew he had ego problems, but I never thought he would do something like this. I never thought he would value money over human life. Neither did I admitted. Which is a painful reminder that we can never truly know what someone is capable of until they're tested. Your father was tested, and he failed catastrophically. But you were tested too, Owen. And you passed. You chose justice over safety, truth over silence. You chose to be the kind of man who stands up to evil even when it costs everything. I have never been more proud to be your mother. By 2 a.m., Owen was stable enough that the doctors encouraged me to go home and sleep. I was reluctant to leave him, but Sarah promised to call immediately if there were any changes, and Owen himself told me I looked like death and needed rest. I drove back to Greenwich as the sun was beginning to rise, the world looking different than it had 3 days ago. I had left this house Thursday afternoon as a successful CEO whose biggest concern was closing a business deal. I was returning as someone who had faced the darkest capabilities of human greed and survived, who had fought monsters in white coats and won, who had saved her son from the ultimate betrayal. The house was eerily quiet. I walked through rooms that felt unfamiliar, despite having lived here for 15 years. This was where Owen had grown up, where I had built a life with Pierce, before discovering who he really was. So many memories contaminated now by truth. I went upstairs to Owen's old room and lay down on his bed, surrounded by remnants of his childhood. Lacrosse trophies, debate team awards, photos of him smiling at various ages. This boy, this beautiful, brave boy, had almost died because he believed in justice. But he had survived. We had both survived. For the first time in 72 hours, I slept. I woke up 12 hours later to my phone ringing. It was Sarah Whitmore, with news that made my heart soar. Owen's neurological tests were coming back better than anyone had dared hope. The damage from the neurotoxin had been caught early enough that his cognitive function appeared intact. He would need physical therapy for some residual motor control issues and time to heal from the traumatic brain injury itself. But the prognosis was excellent. Full recovery was not just possible, but expected. I drove back to Yale New Haven immediately, arriving to find Owen sitting up in bed, eating Jell-O, and talking to Margaret Chen about his testimony. He looked tired and bruised, but undeniably alive and present in a way that made me want to cry with relief all over again. "Mom," he said when he saw me, his face lighting up, "Margaret says the grand jury is meeting next week. They're going to indict everyone." "All 17 people we arrested," Margaret confirmed, "plus 3 more we identified from Owen's evidence and the computers we seized. We're looking at RICO charges, conspiracy to commit murder, wire fraud, healthcare fraud, falsifying medical records, unlawful human experimentation. The list goes on. Lennox alone is facing 47 separate counts." "What about the families?" I asked. "The other victims?" "We've contacted 19 of the 23 families so far," Margaret said quietly. "As you can imagine, they're devastated to learn the truth. Several are filing civil suits against the hospital Lennox and MedTech Solutions. There's talk of a class action that could bankrupt Greenwich Medical Center entirely." "Good," I thought savagely. "Let the institution that enabled this horror face consequences too. Maybe it would send a message to other hospitals that turning a blind eye to corruption has a price." Over the following days, the story exploded across national news. Prestigious Connecticut hospital at center of illegal experimentation scandal. Renowned doctor accused of murdering patients in secret drug trials. Mother and son team up to expose medical conspiracy. The media attention was overwhelming and invasive, but it served a purpose. It ensured that what happened at Greenwich Medical Center would never be dismissed or forgotten. Owen spent 8 more days at Yale New Haven before being discharged to outpatient rehabilitation. His physical recovery was remarkable. Within 3 weeks, he was walking without assistance. His speech had returned to normal, and cognitive tests showed no permanent damage. The doctors called it miraculous. I called it the result of catching the poison early enough and having the courage to fight back. Elena did accept my offer to join the Owen and Emma Foundation. We officially established it 6 weeks after Owen's rescue, with a mission to advocate for patient safety, medical ethics oversight, and protection for healthcare whistleblowers. Our first major initiative was pushing for federal legislation requiring independent review boards for all experimental treatments and creating a confidential reporting system for medical staff who witness misconduct. The trials began in April, 7 months after that terrible Thursday night when everything changed. Pierce's trial came first. I attended every day, sitting in the front row where he could see me, wanting him to understand that I would bear witness to his judgment. His lawyers tried to paint him as a misguided professional who got in over his head, but the encrypted messages Owen had recovered destroyed that defense. The jury heard Pierce discussing acceptable mortality rates and the Richardson problem. They heard him laugh about families being too grief-stricken to ask inconvenient questions. It took the jury 4 hours to convict him on all counts. 22 years in federal prison. He would be 81 when released, his medical license permanently revoked, his reputation destroyed beyond any possibility of redemption. When the verdict was read, Pierce looked at me across the courtroom. I don't know what he expected to see. Forgiveness, perhaps, or at least some flicker of the love that had existed 3 decades ago when we were young and believed we would change the world together. Instead, I looked back at him with cold satisfaction and mouthed 2 words. You failed. He turned away, shoulders slumped, as the marshals took him into custody. Lennox's trial was longer and more complex, lasting 6 weeks as prosecutors methodically presented evidence of his crimes. 23 families testified about losing loved ones they now knew had been murdered. Elena spent 3 days on the stand, calmly and precisely documenting everything she had witnessed over 6 months of horror. Owen testified for 5 hours, walking the jury through his investigation, showing them the evidence he and Emma had gathered, explaining how his own father had betrayed him. The defense tried to argue that Lennox was a visionary pursuing medical advancement, that his methods were unorthodox, but his intentions pure. The prosecution countered with Emma Richardson's autopsy photos from her accident, with financial records showing Lennox had accumulated over $3 million from his arrangement with MedTech Solutions, with testimony from Daniel Foster describing how he had monitored dying patients to ensure none survived long enough to expose the truth. The jury convicted Lennox on 44 of 47 counts. The judge sentenced him to 35 years without possibility of parole. At 62 years old, Lennox would die in prison, and there was poetic justice in that. He had stolen the futures of 23 people, and now his own future was gone. Greenwich Medical Center filed for bankruptcy reorganization after the civil suits exceeded $800 million. The hospital was eventually sold to a larger health system that implemented comprehensive ethics reforms and renamed the facility. Every doctor and administrator who had worked there during Lennox's reign was investigated. 12 more lost their medical licenses for various degrees of complicity or negligence. MedTech Solutions, LLC, ceased to exist. The pharmaceutical company behind it was hit with federal sanctions and criminal charges. 3 executives received prison sentences ranging from 8 to 15 years. Owen threw himself into the foundation's work with the passion of someone who had found his true calling. He became a powerful advocate for medical ethics reform, speaking at conferences, testifying before Congress, meeting with families who had lost loved ones to medical malpractice or abuse. Watching him transform his trauma into purpose was one of the most beautiful things I had ever witnessed. One afternoon in late September, almost a year after the nightmare began, Owen and I visited Emma Richardson's grave. We had finally convinced authorities to change her death certificate from accidental to homicide, a small victory that her parents said brought them peace they hadn't thought possible. I'm sorry I couldn't save you, Owen said quietly, kneeling by the headstone. I'm sorry they got to you before we had enough evidence to stop them. But Emma, I promise you, your death meant something. The foundation, the legislation, the reforms, the lives that will be saved because of what we exposed, that's your legacy. You're the hero of this story, not me. I put my hand on his shoulder, thinking about this brave young woman I had never met who had seen evil and refused to look away. She and Owen had both been willing to sacrifice everything for justice, and their courage had saved countless future victims from the same fate. She would be proud of you, I told Owen. Wherever she is, I believe she knows what you did to honor her memory. We stood there for a long time in comfortable silence, three people bound together by tragedy and triumph. A son who had fought for justice, a mother who had refused to let evil win, and a young woman whose death had exposed corruption that might otherwise have continued destroying lives for years. That evening, I sat in my home office, the same office where I had built Vandermeer Financial Consulting from nothing, where I had proven to the world that I was more than capable of succeeding in a male-dominated field, where I had made the millions that Pierce resented and that ultimately meant nothing compared to having Owen alive and safe. I had sold the company 6 months ago for $23 million. Every penny went into the Owen and Emma Foundation. Money had been Pierce's weakness, his downfall, his temptation. I wanted to prove that money could also be a force for good, that wealth carried responsibilities beyond personal comfort. My phone buzzed with a text from Owen. Mom, the Senate just passed the Medical Ethics Transparency Act. Emma's law is real. We did it. I smiled, tears streaming down my face for what felt like the 1,000th time since this all began. We had done it. We had taken the worst thing that could have happened and transformed it into something that would protect vulnerable patients for generations to come. That night, I sat by my window watching the sun set over Greenwich, thinking about how much had changed in a year. I had lost a husband, though, in truth, I had lost the man I thought Pierce was long before his arrest. I had nearly lost my son. I had discovered that evil often wears a white coat and hides behind credentials and respectability. But I had also discovered that courage comes in unexpected forms, from immigrant nurses who risk everything to do what's right, from young men who choose justice over safety, from mothers who refuse to accept the narrative authorities try to feed them. I had learned that sometimes the most important battles are fought not in boardrooms but in hospital corridors, not for profit, but for principle. Owen was alive. Emma's death had been avenged. 23 families knew the truth about what happened to their loved ones. And because of what we had endured and exposed, future patients would be safer. It wasn't the ending I would have chosen if I could have written the story differently. But it was an ending I could live with. One where justice prevailed, where the vulnerable were protected, where doing the right thing mattered more than personal cost. I picked up my phone and sent Owen a reply. We did it together, sweetheart. You, me, Emma, Elena, and everyone who refused to stay silent. I'm so proud of us all. His response came quickly. Love you, Mom. Thank you for never giving up on me. Never, I typed back. That's what mothers do. We fight for our children no matter what it costs, and we win. I set the phone down and looked out at the darkening sky, feeling something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Peace. The nightmare was over. Justice had been served. And my son, my beautiful, brave son, was alive and whole and making the world better,